Okay, well, it's exactly 5 o'clock, so congratulations to everybody making it on time. I guess I'll call the meeting to order at 5 o'clock on the dot. So we'll get started. I guess the first order of item on the agenda, the Chief Administrative Officer has asked for time to make an announcement to the Water Committee. So Lorna, I'll recognize you.
Thank you. I would like to introduce Negin Tusi, who is an engineer, water infrastructure with WSP, and Clive Leung, who's a senior project engineer, infrastructure manager, and planning with WSP. WSP, former Opus, former Dayton Knight, were the original engineering firm that designed and worked on the water system that was installed in the village. So WSP has considerable knowledge of the water system. And Chris Boyd of ISL Engineering will continue to work for the village on other important engineering projects, such as the multi-use trail. And it was decided that because of the background that WSP has on the water system, that they would be our engineers for the purpose of the water system. So I'd like to introduce Negin and Clive to the rest of the committee members and to council.
Like welcome on board or welcome back, whatever you wish.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us today.
Welcome, Clive. And again.
Thanks for welcome to the Water Committee deliberations. I think it's very appropriate that you are able to attend, because I think we sort of reached a major milestone point in our committee deliberations. So I'd like to just go through where we think we're at and how we plan on proceeding from this point forward. So welcome to the group.
Thank you. And I would also let you know that Clive and Negin and myself and Stuart met with 3 engineers from DNV related to their report that is on your agenda tonight. So if you have any questions, you probably would like to talk to them about some of the information they gleaned from that meeting. Okay,
well, that sort of leads into the first item on reports, and I'm not sure who's going to handle this one. Is Jamie or Bruce or Lorna, are you handling this, or do I get the honor?
We could give you the honor. If you like, you could maybe ask Negin to, or Clive to provide an overview of the discussions that were held with the DNV engineers.
Okay. Well, I guess before I invite them to comment, I'd just like to go through the sort of history of how we started this journey to get information on what sort of a water flow we could have in addition to the 25 liters per second, or sorry, 21 liters per second that we're currently getting from the district to North Van. So I guess back in March 1st, 2019, we received a letter from District of North Van, and in that letter, they indicated that there was a possibility of increasing the flow to 30 or maybe 60 liters per second, which was attractive for our water committee because we were trying to figure out how to get more water for firefighting. So I think that was one of the options that was on the table, and we were looking for information from North Van to say what they meant by that point in their particular letter. So we've been asking and for information on the progress in the modeling. And I guess the only thing I can say from the committee point of view is that it was very disappointing to see that the village appears to be asking for 100 liters per second. So I don't know how that came about and who asked for it, but that's all past now. The nice thing about this report is that it does definitely give us an endpoint, which amount of water that we can't have, both from the volume point of view and from the cost point of view. So I guess that's the position right now that Water Committee finds himself in. And so I guess that leads in nicely, Najin or Clive. I don't know who wants to tell us what happened at your meeting with District of North Van, but we're very much interested.
Yeah, sure. I can jump in there. Thanks everyone for your time tonight. Yeah, so we had our meeting with North Vancouver yesterday with some of that background, Ian, but definitely on this, had a discussion with them just on the initial findings that they had. One thing that we should probably reiterate and note for the good of the committee as we discussed the report from North Vancouver is that they also mentioned at the start of the meeting that the report should be taken as a draft for discussion, and they can definitely continue to assist the village in pursuing a more detailed assessment as required for the village. So that 100 liter per second analysis definitely was brought up. And a question was set out as to, specifically, in terms of the numbers that were chosen, and they did agree that, yeah, that number is just a number that they had chosen, and it could be revised. So I'm not privy to why they did choose 100 at the end of the day, but it seems like at least they have a good understanding of the system. And it's as they noted, it's a draft, so they can definitely update that assessment as required. Looks like we have some questions already. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, or Bruce or Martin. Oh, Bruce, you're muted there. Bruce, you're muted. Bruce, you're muted.
Sorry, I just was saying through the chair, Ian, do you have a preference as to whether we ask questions now? Do you want any questions asked, or would you like to come back to it after the presentation?
No, I think if Clive feels it's appropriate at this point for a question, that's fine.
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
Well, thank you. If I might, Clive, thank you very much. So first, I take it from what you're saying that they weren't indicating that they were all done with the study, and I'm very glad to hear that, since I don't think any of us thought 100 liters a second was a reasonable and a feasible ask. I think I understand how they got to it, but I'm only speculating, and I don't think it matters now. Did you, as I understood the report, and I have to emphasize I'm not an engineer, as some of you on this call are, the impression I got from reading their letter was that they were modeling based on an assumption of a fire flow for 24 hours. Am I wrong about that?
That's what the report says, but in terms of what the model can produce, so I've done models across the entire Lower Mainland. I produced master plans for Port Moody and more, but yeah, I'm not too worried about that. Their results should be instantaneous as they flow that 100 liters per second across the river. That's what they're seeing in their system. So I'm not worried about that part.
Okay, maybe I misunderstand, but that number struck me as being in the neighborhood of 60 times the water that we used on the very fire that triggered all this concern. So it struck me as conservative to a degree that seemed unreasonable. But if it's really just something that tells us they have a model now that allows them to play with different metrics, and I see you nodding,
Yeah.
that's very good news. And also very good news that they see this just as a first draft. I would hate to feel they felt they'd answered all our questions and put in excessive resources into this report. If it's a model, if it's creating a model that they can then substitute different numbers for, I'm much more comfortable. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, you got it bang on, Bruce.
Hey, Bruce, your hand's still up.
I'll figure that out in just a moment. Go right ahead.
Okay, Martin, is your hand up or are you just waving your pen?
No, yeah, well, I'm doing both. No, I'm not used to Zoom. I'm more used to other systems. Like we're starting to talk about specifics. Can we take a step backwards? And because I'm not sure, like WSP, which is coming in as to what the big portrait has been described at, you know, because you're jumping in when there's certain levels of assessments and studies which have been done in the last year, and I'm not sure if you are aware of everything that's been done. And this and that. So if somebody could brief me, either Lorna or Clive, just as to what you understand as to what has been assessed so far, and what I shouldn't say what your mandate is, but what direction and what are we looking for? If you can just clarify that, and then I'll follow up with some questions.
Yeah, that's a great question to understand context where I'm starting with and where we're starting with. Yeah, so been reading and catching up on the history, understanding. Yeah, there have been WSP through our old firms, Opus and Dayton and Knight. We helped Village of Belcarra set up the initial water system, and then at that time, there's a level of service decided for potable water in terms of domestic supply mostly, but sort of a limited fire supply. The two river crossings drawing water from the District of North Van, supplying that, and those two river crossings being sized as such. And then I know since then there have been concerns about fire protection in the city, discussions between the fire underwriters survey, insurance probably likely, although I'm not sure, and WSP to further improve the system to provide additional fire protection to the system. I understand there was a study done to install a reservoir that was set at a certain cost to expand the Tatlow Reservoir, perhaps, or expand the reservoir at a higher elevation. That would help, provide the volume you needed, plus some also deficiencies in the system, where, say, the Tatlow Reservoir was located very in a similar elevation to some of the properties it was servicing. So I understand all that. I understand the cost of the reservoir was seen as significant, and you would require definitely some assistance from federal or the province to recoup the money to build that reservoir and increase the fire protection. And as such, this study and sort of request to North Vancouver was to look at some other alternative options to keep yourselves with a few options to see if more fire flow could be obtained without needing that reservoir upgrade possibly. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Okay, so I'll follow up some questions on, like, I see that you have a good comprehension, or let's say the overall portrait as to what has been going on. Yeah, so definitely that original Opus study of a new tank or a secondary tank at some higher elevation, with a kind of a pitch number cost of 3.8 million with no supporting documentation behind it or sufficient. It is my belief, and most likely so, is 3.8 just the storage tank? Is it upgrade of a whole system? It wasn't defined. It was very ambiguous. And normally when cost estimates, if you go with the cost estimate classification system, the accuracy of your estimate is a function of a level of detail that you put into to the engineering side. So all this was kind of fuzzy and unknown, and so we had some big red lights, and they're saying, is this the best option also? So that's where, yes, we started, not only us, but the council and other like residents started discussing as to other alternatives. And yes, the natural one is just increasing flow from District of North Vancouver. There was some conflicting information at the time, and it seemed to have been clarified over the last couple of years. So that was the source. Now, as far as, I'll give you my opinion, and I'll invite anybody else to comment on that. And you kind of phrased it, is that for any decision to be made, at this time, it would be more useful in evaluating various alternatives at a conceptual level phase. So not going too far into the engineering, but like these are the 4 or 5 options, and then doing a cost estimate on them, and also like listing out the pros and cons and the weaknesses of each alternative. I believe just that one document would provide a lot of insight to council for any decision making, and then we proceed gradually in the next phase in exploring one leading alternative or 2, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's the normal engineering process. And so, you know, there's been various discussions on various deficiencies on the system and so on. I believe that the first step is, 1, identify what the issues are. So yes, insufficient storage or insufficient fire flow capabilities. You just pointed out the other one that I'm very concerned about as to the low pressure levels in our current system, having everything under one pressure, basically corresponding to the level of a tap load tank with no boost. Well, we have one booster pump on main, but you know, the network does have its deficiencies and so on. And so listing all these issues before developing any alternatives. Is a tap load tank, does it have a life expectancy of 5 years or 20 years or 50 years? It's kind of critical before we start selecting alternatives. So those are my thoughts, and we've discussed them to certain degrees. And then if we come back to our terms of reference to the committee, it was stated last year that the committee would be presented, and I can't remember the exact wording, but would be presented with alternatives and make a recommendation to council. This is the kind of framework that we imagined 1 year ago. Like, it can be modified, but it's the discussions, it's a result of discussions that took place over the last 2 years. So those are my thoughts, and like, thank you for your summary as to your understanding as to what has been going on, and also the direction we would like to take. And then I'll just like to see anybody's opinion on the direction that we should take, and I'll also like to hear council's opinion on things. I remind you that I wrote a letter to council and to mayor and council 2 years ago. I never got a response, and I'm not even sure that council is in agreement with that letter which I sent to council. It's basically what I just described.
Right. Okay, got a phone interruption here. All right. Does anybody else on the committee have any comments? I see everybody's, Jim, you're muted and so is Doug, so. Doug, you want to talk? You're still muted, Doug. There you are. Good.
Yeah, no, I think, really Martin's covered pretty well everything. Off the top of my head now, I can't think of anything. I could make a comment that we did have the fire department did do a meeting, a practice where we went and sort of looked at the whole system and looked at the inlet building and looked at Dutchman's Creek, and a lot of the guys weren't aware of that, so that's something that was useful. Went up to Tatlow and Brad took us, explained everything there. So that was good as far as our perspective. But it was just good that the department now knows we've got Dutchman's Creek available. But as far as anything else, yeah, we need to sort of move on from here, I guess, and find out where we can go to get more water. I was disappointed with the 100 liters per second, and if we could get 30 or 40, it'd be nice to see. We'll see where you guys are going to continue to look at that, I guess, and have discussions. That's about all I have to say. Martin's kind of covered a lot of stuff there, so.
Okay, that's good. Jim, would you like to say anything or
Okay,
comment?
am I unmuted?
No, you're good. I can hear you.
Okay, I guess I'd agree with Martin on it, only the basic contents, but I'd be curious to see if what else might have occurred at this meeting with North Vancouver.
Yeah, definitely. I have a few more points I can share.
If you would, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to interrupt. Bruce had his hand up, but we can wait for Bruce's question, I guess.
Oh, that's fine. I'll wait. This is the committee's meeting. I'll be quiet.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So other items discussed, and upon reading the report, some other things that we noted. Yeah. So definitely with a memo, obvious to everyone that they were reviewing a few scenarios for fire supply. The critical scenario was having a dual fire sort of situation, having one fire in North Vancouver at the same time another fire is in Belcarra, and supplying that water at the same time. So that's where the cost at the end of that memo comes in, which is 5.6 million, I think, which is higher than the reservoir. So I have that sort of in mind as well. If you're looking to compare options, you need to find an option that seems to be a lower cost rather than looking further into higher cost options. So we asked a few questions around that in particular. Yeah, just having the assumption of that event that two fires are occurring at the same time. Did they really consider that as a likely scenario? And as a system themselves, they do consider that as an increasing concern. So that's what they have designed their system to. And definitely the agreement with the village of Belcarra, as it has been set forth previously and updated from 14 liters per second to 21 liters per second, was with the fact that the water supply from the North Vancouver was not a fire flow supply. So all that, to me, that all lined up. One of the costs, though, when they developed that 5.6 million, I guess there's some assumptions as well, some assumptions that that aren't accounted for like the final build out of Maplewood Flats and the final build out of the First Nations. So, so in that sense, water demand into their system could increase as well, which could make infrastructure sizing a bit bigger. but we sort of, I just sort of threw it out there at the end of the meeting with the district that because say in particular the water main that they discussed as part of the report is more of a redundancy for their system, which would be required for their own service to their own areas, to the First Nations and to Belcarra, that cost of that water main redundancy that they identified shouldn't be seen as a full cost borne by Belcarra. So even within the report and the numbers that they produced, the 5.6 million, I don't believe that the full cost could be allocated to all of you. It's something that does need discussion at the meeting. I guess they probably have some new staff as well there, so they don't have the full background, but definitely they sort of indicated that yeah, that's something that is maybe further down the line that they could discuss for sure, but it's not in the report, obviously. So, and then another thing was, okay, so there's, yeah, one thing was that the modeling did not take into account the full build outs of of all the future development. And then the other item, which was assumption for now, was that their fire flows that they calculated through their model was just to allocate that 100 liter per second to the end of their system at Deep Cove before it crosses the river crossings. So, I mean, it's okay for the initial draft and initial run of the model. And definitely because we don't really care, maybe I'm getting a sense that 100 liters per second is something we want to pursue anymore. If we pursue something less, say 50 or 60 liters per second at that location, I mean, sorry, I mean to say that their modeling only stops at Deep Cove, but we would, WSP could do this, but Belcarra would need a engineer to just do a quick assessment to just make sure that the water can get to the Tatlow Reservoir. So they've made an assumption that they can withdraw, like we can ask them to run their model to say, what's the flow and pressure at Deep Cove when you take 30 liters per second at the crossing? What's the flow and pressure when you take 40 liters, 50 liters per second at the crossing? And then with that flow and pressure number, we can do a quick calculation to see if we can still get to the reservoir, because there will be, my concern just from reading the previous work done is that the river crossing could be your limiting factor as well. So that's definitely something that should be looked at. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are the two main things, two or three main things that we discussed as well.
Okay, I wasn't paying attention who put their hand up first, but we give the senior alderman a crack at the.
Well, I would default to any of your committee members first.
If
You're on.
I'll just add a quick comment. It's and then I'll let you speak, Bruce. It's like the one thing that hasn't been said that kind of occurred in the last year. There were discussions and various calculations. You know, like everything started out with trying to determine what fire flow we should get. You know, and that's kind of in my opinion, it wasn't necessarily the best approach for a small village like Belcarra. And so in my thought of mind, we should get as much as we can afford, basically.
Yes.
And so is the fundamental point. And being a small village, we have very limited capabilities. That's where the cost estimate too, it needs to be complete. We don't have other buckets to finance something which hasn't been estimated. So that being said, the last point I just wanted to make is that there were various calculations, and Bruce participated in that, was that it was kind of eyeballed that we don't need with a moderate flow increase from District of North Vancouver, we could attain, I can't remember what the number is, like 60 liters per second for, I can't remember what, an hour and a half or 2 hours. And the idea was to try and have them evaluate, let's say, increasing from 20 to 30 to 40 to 60 and doing evaluations based on that with the costs and you know, tabling out alternatives just based on those increases in flow from District of North Vancouver. So the point is that it was felt that we don't need to go to 100. We can probably, an increase of an extra 20, for example, would probably increase our fire flow capabilities significantly.
Mhm.
Yeah, and if I may just add one more thing, I think as opposed to Martin's point, during our call yesterday, I'm sure it's a question on the committee's mind is what can they give you is probably the bottom line question of what can their system handle essentially given its current state. And we did ask that question, and I think that's where the discussion went towards. They can look at different flows, but they haven't so far. So they couldn't give a number that we can do 30, let's say, or we can do 40. So that number has not been modeled yet. The one thing that they've also indicated in the memo already, and they indicated a call yesterday as well, is the limiting factors in their system, one of them being one of the pump stations that they've called out, is already at capacity during their summer months. So just something to keep in mind. What the implications of that is probably is that District of North Van needs to upgrade this anyways at some point in their future when they deem that that's an unacceptable risk for them. But we did ask that question, but just so I guess the committee is aware, there was no number that was given by district that they can handle at this point beyond the 100 liters that they've ran in the model, and that they're already at engineers' best practice capacity or beyond that at the one pump station that they've identified as a limiting factor. But as Clive alluded to earlier, that would generally be something that potentially be an opportunity for cost sharing, because District of North Van would also be getting the advantage of upgrading their system.
Yeah. We haven't asked them the question outright if they think the village can get 10 liters per second more without any extra cost, but my sense is that they're sort of hesitant to say that as well. Two reasons. One reason is because that one pump station is already close to capacity. Second reason is because if the city were to have spare capacity, I don't think they sort of understand, or not understand, I won't say understand, but they probably don't have a good way to determine if that spare, even if it's 5 liters per second or 10 liters per second spare, it should be, allocated to Belcarra, or if it should be part of their system that supplies the future developments in the First Nations or Maplewood Flats. We could definitely ask that question and see what they say, but my sense is they might push back quite quickly on that, just because they have indicated they're at capacity already for their pump station.
Okay, thanks. Bruce, I think your hand's been up for a while now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, very, very interesting conversation. I can completely understand their hesitancy on telling you what they could accommodate at no cost or at minimal cost. Please pardon the ringing in the background. However, when I look at their numbers, and again, I'm not an engineer, but it appeared to me, yes, that you could see that their own scenario where they have 120 liters per second flow for a fire that goes for an extraordinarily long period of time, they indicate that there's no guarantee their system could cope at that pump location with that, which I would take to mean any additional demand is probably going to be unrealistic for them. Is that a fair characterization of what they provided us in their letter?
I would agree with your statement, except the 24-hour doesn't matter. Their results are instantaneous, and they're looking at the pump capacity, maximum flow, instantaneously. So
Okay, well, I'll learn later about that. That one thing concerned me, obviously, it's not a major matter. I guess some of the things we could talk about in terms of options, it seems to me. First, the observation, they do cite a 25 liter a second flow at one point in their report that we had drawn that. Our own data showed we were only getting 19.2 liters a second. So it's only a few liters a second, but if we're only needing another 10 or 15, that's probably significant, and we should make sure our meters are showing similar readings. So that one observation. I wonder then about the flow for us. We only need it during a fire, and the scenario they're describing is a problem, is a case where we have two fires. And of course, all things are possible in heaven and earth, but I think we'd be very understanding if they had a fire on their side, if they had the capacity to just automatically limit the flow to us to, let us say, the 20 liters a second they've already agreed to, no matter what they offered us in the non-fire circumstances. So I think some of those things possibly could be explored with them, where we wouldn't have a guarantee of, let us say for the sake of argument, 40 liter a second flow, which in my opinion, as Martin cited, more than meets realistic requirements for a little community like ours. If we only had that when they were not fighting a fire within that part of North Vancouver, that would be a solution, in my opinion, given how unlikely a dual fire scenario is. Not to say it can't happen, but the risk is relatively low. And the other observation I would make, and you touched on it just a moment ago, Clive, which is our capacity on our end. I don't think we want to make major changes in our own system's capacity. And I would note that the one extreme case we had, which triggered a lot of this anxiety, which was a 2-home fire about 5 years ago now on Turtle Head in the village. We had everything on to the max capacity, and we were in a relatively good pressure level because we were down close to the ocean. And the system was putting out, per our SCADA data, 63 liters a second. That's with everything full on. So why anybody would think we could use 100 liters a second coming across the channel is beyond me. So I doubt our system could cope with much more than providing a 60 liter a second fire flow, even in our optimal locations. Again, I may be wrong. It's something for an engineer to assess, but it seems to me that we're not looking for more than 60 liters a second of fire flow. And ballpark figures, we're probably looking at, to achieve an hour and a half. And as was noted earlier, that is that's the sort of thing that about 35 liters a second from North Vancouver would provide us with under worst case scenarios in terms of our tank level when the fire started. 40, I think, would be generous if we could achieve that. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions, points to be made? Jim, you're,
Jim?
yep, Jim?
Yeah, I'd be curious as to what the real capacity of our line across the water is. I think I would agree with most of the things that Bruce has just said and stated. But I mean, if we have a certain capacity there, maybe we should be considering starting to look at that point.
yeah, yes, definitely.
I mean, if it's 40, or even maybe we have 60, but I mean, we only got the equivalent of one 8-inch line going across there. So presumably one of these gentlemen or the lady can calculate that for us and say, well, you guys are going to be into a major $2 million change of piping again. You want to do something on the water side only, but let's just see what that is, if we could.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the points I was mentioning. We would need to understand from the North Vancouver model what flow rate, what pressure is at Deep Cove, and then once we have the flow rate and pressure at Deep Cove, then we can calculate from Deep Cove if there's enough energy to make it to that reservoir, to your Tatler reservoir, to fill your reservoir, and that would in essence evaluate the capacity that you have in your underwater crossings. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the first things we would recommend.
Okay, we already know what the pressure is, presumably, don't we?
No, the pressure changes when the flows change, right? So
Okay.
as more flow is drawn from the system at Deep Cove, the pressure changes because
Okay.
it reduces. that
Anyways, I'll
pressure.
leave that for you gentlemen to calculate.
I do recall when we were asking Walt Bayless, he came over in 2019 and talked to us to answer questions on the design of the system. And I can't remember his answer, but he was asked what would he thought the flow capacity was for the pipes
Mhm.
under the.
I've read some documentation that says the pipes were designed for 30 liters per second, but
Yeah.
definitely we can do some quick calculations to check
Yeah,
if that's still valid. It's mainly it is the energy that North Van provides at Deep Cove, which is a function of flow and pressure, and the
Mhm.
energy loss that before it hits Tatlow Reservoir to see if it can still make it to Tatlow.
Okay.
Right. If I can just comment there to answer Ian, the context in which Walt was answering that question, it wasn't clear as to what his basis was. My understanding is what you just said, Clive, that it was as a result of the pressure and flow provided by District of North Vancouver, which was a limiting factor of the capacity of the underwater mains and nothing else, while Ian and Jim understood something else.
Okay, fair enough. Is everybody questioned out then? I know that there's other issues that we'll pick up as we go along, but I just want to make sure everybody's comfortable where we're at right now. And
Yeah, I think we're quite on the same page. I think I'm on the same page with all of you. Yeah, there's definitely it's a good start that North Vancouver, and then I'm reminded from Lorna yesterday that this is work that North Vancouver has done for us, you know, with their own time and efforts, and it's a really good documentation to start from. So I think the next step is you know, include some of the analysis that WSP could help out with the calculation specifically of the capacity of the underwater crossing. If there's definitely a lower flow rate, match that to see what North Vancouver says about that. If it's a lower rate than 100 liters per second, what they foresee as problems with their system. And if it's the same problems, I did bring up the sort of, if the dual fire issue there was too conservative as an assumption for them, but they're pretty adamant that that's what they believe their system should be designed towards. So I don't know if there's too much discussion left on that part. I do agree in a sense that when there is a fire and say village of Belcarre draws more water, say 50 liters per second or 40 liters per second, it does in a sense limit what North Vancouver can do for their own system, and based on their acceptance of a level of risk to service their own system, that's their decision to make, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's just a comment there.
Clive, I would just add the point I made earlier. I mean, I don't think we would have an objection to them having a control to shut off our supply when they're fighting a fire.
Right, okay, yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it. I had made that discussion over a year ago. Is you know, like fire events themselves are unusual events, and you can have a scenario of an earthquake where you're getting pipes like rupturing on both North Van and Belcarre, and then not having that capability of fighting fires at that time is probably not a good decision to be made. But it's a trade-off which has big consequences. It's not something that I would like recommend myself.
Totally understood.
okay, well, I'd like to move forward if I could into the item B, my verbal report on where I think we are right now in the water committee, if that's okay. And I think all the, there's a series of items that perhaps Clive and Najin might be interested in. So I just wanted to begin to get the sort of outline of where I think the water committee and the council are right now. I think we have a series of items on the table, and they're all sort of leading towards a conclusion where I think the control and maintenance of the water and firefighting systems are going to be much advanced from where they are right now. I guess the first meeting of the water committee back in February of 2019, we asked the village for 6 items so that we could understand how the system was operated and what was being done to maintain it. And these were the operation and maintenance manual, public works regular monitoring records for reservoirs and pump stations, how the quality control was being maintained, requirements of fire underwriters surveys, obtaining details on design drawings and specifications of the water system, and establishing best practice based on the current data that was available. Unfortunately, at the time, none of that information could be provided. Now, 3 years later, I'm pleased to note that those items are available. We've found most of the information. If we haven't found the information, we're having it generated right now. So looking at the items that are in the state of being developed or studied, the first and probably the most critical part is that we have a documented water system operation and maintenance manual. We currently do not know how to operate the water system as a combined system. The system is being run very effectively right now for the potable water system. And all the decisions for potable water are being made in accordance with the regulations and the safety of the system. There's no question of the safety, as evidenced by the fact that since the system has been turned on, there's never been a boiled water order. And I think all of the meetings with the Fraser Health are indicating that they're satisfied with the operation of the system. But what we don't know is where are the critical limits if we start adding in things like minimum setting on the Tatlow tank and recovery time for the event of a fire being issued. So I think that part of it, excuse me, the toll-free service wants to know my opinion. Anyway, I think that back in February 21, we had a contract assigned to write an operating and maintenance manual for our system, which would basically describe how the water system could be controlled. balancing off the potable water requirements with the firefighting requirements. And so that's that particular project is underway right now. The other item that we identified and are concerned about are two critically important valves that were designed for the safety of our water supply, have been altered significantly in function. These are the seismic valve at the Tatlow tank, and there was no documentation to describe when this valve was taken out of service. And this is something that we're hoping, I don't know if it's been assigned for WSP to look at how this valve can be put back into service effectively and safely. The valve went in, but unfortunately, control wasn't there because of the sensitivity of this valve. So it was felt very strongly that the manual that we're writing needed to describe what these valves do for the safety of the water system and include authorization procedures for making any changes to the settings or installation of these valves. So just recently, a draft operation and procedural manual has been developed by Ralph Drew, and I think he submitted that manual, and we're hoping that material that Chris has been developing can be incorporated into the same valve, and I think Stuart is working on something on that, along that line. So that's the first major component that we see on the horizon to increase the controls of our system. The second item is to do with the letter from Fraser Health regarding our annual water system. Within the system, we wanted to see an increase in the minimum water setting for the valve, and the proposal was to increase by 2% and then do the sampling and monitoring for a year, and then increase again another 2% if all of the readings were acceptable. Now, we're not surprised in the letter from Fraser Health that they didn't comment on the actual 2%, but what they did comment on was the need for a detailed long-term monitoring plan. So that, I would think, from a regulatory agency point of view, their prime interest is residual chlorine levels, readings, I mean, in the system. So they're, I would assume, happy as long as we've got measurable or residual chlorine in the system. So the second point that they made in their letter was to do with chlorine residual and perhaps the need for chlorine disinfection equipment to be obtained for future needs. This has now been suggested to the village in 2 years in a row. So I think this is something that the council needs to be aware of and act upon. I think that the residents of Belcarra may be concerned about this, but be assured we're already have chlorine in the water system. So we're not talking about the good old days when you put 2 or 3 parts per million in the system and say, there, that's chlorinated. So I think there's many chlorine systems available, and they need to be explored as to what might be an option on the table for the future. One of the things that I've always been concerned about is that our water operators have no options. If they see the chlorine dropping on any of the dead end lines, they have to open up the lines and spill water. That's the only way they can get more chlorine into these particular lines. And I would suggest, with the cost of water going up and up, that option may not be available forever. Okay, the third item that I think we've been trying to get, and we now have, I think, a pretty complete set of drawings for the water system. We have received the Dayton and Knight record drawings, and just recently Ron Beasley's provided us PDF copies of the drawings that he produced. So these include the Tatlow tank, reservoir valves, and piping details. And I think all of the committee members now have a complete set of these drawings. I guess item 4 then, which is now underway, being developed with Stuart's leadership, is the readings of domestic water meters being done on all the residents that are hooked up to the water system. I understand that they've all been read once, and they're in the process of reading a second time, which I hope would allow us to calculate the domestic consumption figures for the water system. And then comparing that with the total flows should give us an estimate of what spillage we have or in the system. The fifth item, which is interesting, that just came to light, was the 2012 report from Crow Utilities, Pumps and Fabrication regarding the cleaning and inspection of the Tatlow tank that was done in 2012, and recommending a 10-year inspection. So it's now due for another inspection in February of 2022, next year. Along with all of the other items that are going on, I think there's a letter that we've sent out for prevention and mitigation activities within the village, which is very important, that because of the low water availability and the fact that Belcara, beautiful, sited in the midst of a forest, we need to have some consideration for what are the fire risks around the village and how can we best mitigate those risks. And I believe that there's a proposal coming up, Bruce Blackwell, regarding the community wildfire resilience plan that will provide us some funds and also support to the village for evaluating what these risks might be. So I think that in conjunction with the tree committee's recommendations for types of trees and what we should be doing is a really good start for the council to try and implement some sort of a program to minimize the risk of fire spreading through forest or undergrowth or vegetation within the village. The other item that we have recommended back in 2019 to the village was sprinkler systems. And we got a letter back from the province indicating that we could not pass a bylaw that made sprinkler systems in new houses mandatory. But I would hope that council would look at preparing a letter to try to encourage new homes. Most of them are putting sprinkler systems in voluntarily, but making new homeowners in the village aware of the low levels of water for firefighting that we have, and recommending to them strongly that they consider putting in sprinkler systems on their own. So I think that's that's an initiative that we recommended to council, and I hope it doesn't just fade away. And the last item, I guess, is the preparation of a master plan to address the current and future capital asset management. And I think all of these pieces of the puzzle are going to be able to come together in this particular master plan that has to be developed by council. So looking forward to that. So I guess in summarizing that, I would ask other members of the committee if in consideration whether we continue on as a committee with all of the protocols and procedures that a committee must follow, or should we be considering having council designate, if they wish, that we become a a committee, I was just trying to remember now.
I think it was an advisory group you were thinking on.
Yeah, advisory committee, that's the word I was looking for. Senior moments again, but
we're all there.
yeah, but I think that's if every one of the members consider just what is on the table and going to be happening in the next year or two, things are not going to happen very quickly because of the sheer amount of activity that's necessary. But fortunately, we've got engineering consultants that are going to help us through and get these programs recommended to the council. And I think moving the overall water system forward is all those pieces are become a reality. So I would suggest, my preference would be that we become an advisory commit or advisory group to consider issues as they arise, and perhaps make recommendations to council as things start to develop. So I don't know if any other committee members have anything they want to add to that, or if they've got any comments on what they would rather see us as a advisory board or continue on as a water committee. And the silence is deafening. Martin?
Yeah, me like committee advisory committee, it's not like that. To me, is not an issue. Like we are just trying to help out council, like council as best as we can. It's volunteer work, and if we can be of any use, then we are offering our support. What I would like to hear before the end of the meeting, I'm not sure if we have a lot of time, is I'd like to understand what are the next steps from the engineering perspective that the consultant will undertake, and what direction. Once again, I bring back to council, and I'd like to get a response. I've had private discussions with both Bruce and Jamie where you appear to be in agreement, but I haven't got a reply to my letter. And each time I bring out this question of asking the engineering to come up with alternatives, which can be discussed in the committee, to seek to come up with this conceptual level alternative comparison with conceptual or like level 5 cost estimates, if you want, if Clive, if you understand the language. Well, with the I don't know, it's like the cost estimate classification system. So can council just indicate what they want exactly? Should we just be invited to discuss various progress in the water in finding solutions, or are you in agreement that we should proceed, that the engineering should proceed in preparing a alternative comparison analysis? Would that be of use to council? I believe it would be.
Okay, I don't think council's quite prepared to provide terms of reference of the study, Martin.
If I could comment in.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's Bruce here. Just a point, and I was reminding councilors just before the meeting, it's awkward for us because once you have 3 council members together, you in theory have a quorum. And if you get into making decision-making and sharing ideas around decision-making, then you're holding a council meeting. And Lorna will correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's my basic understanding of the process. So council members are going to tend to want to listen and take comments such as that as recommendations. I mean, they need to be discussed by council as a council. And I would only add that in my opinion, the history of the committee was really driven by the focus at the time the committee was struck, which was entirely based, as I read it, on fire flow risk. And Martin, you're suggesting that maybe that's too narrow, and we should back up with it and take a broader perspective rather than simply trying to address what's conceived of as a high risk limited fire flow. And I just would add that I think that has to be discussed by council in council.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I think that question, I would assume, would be fully answered once the council has an opportunity to discuss it as a council. So I think that the question, direction that the engineering WSP is going to be doing needs to be confirmed by council before the water committee is made aware of it. So I think right now I've got item 3 as discussion items, and that's the role that the water committee should be playing right now, is discussing these items and making recommendations, if we can, to the council to have them included in terms of reference for WSP.
Yeah, I don't think WSB has a terms of reference. They're just providing engineering support as the village's engineer. It's not a mandate with this study and do this. I mean,
Well, okay, that's the semantic. They're working right now, I'm glad to see, on the District of North Van issue. So that's one issue they're working on. We've got 4 or 5 other items here to discuss. So I'm not sure that they're ready to give us a report or tell us what.
so if I can just like propose, I mean, if council want to discuss it with like within the council forum, and make if that is required, then if you could proceed with that. I mean, as far as writing terms of reference, I mean, I'll be pleased to write a terms of reference which we can discuss I can present it at a next meeting and we can discuss the merits of it. I mean, I write terms of reference for I'm writing this week, actually, I'm writing terms of reference for 5 engineering consultants. I mean, it's my day-to-day business. And I have no issues doing that. So if council, if they need to discuss it internally, or do you want me to propose a terms of reference as to like an objective as to a certain study which would be delivered for council's consideration? Like,
Yeah.
you want me to present this separately? Like how should I proceed? Or how should the committee proceed?
But Bruce, I don't know if you're on the hot seat again. Well, you're muted.
I was just saying that this falls under the categories of fools rushing in. But to answer Martin's question, I mean, anyone in the village can give us a proposal. So that's one option to council. The other option I'd suggest, and probably more effective in all likelihood, is to seek agreement from your committee and have the committee propose it. So but you always have those 2 options. I mean, anyone in the village can give us a proposal. Thank you. And other, I mean, just as long as we're careful not moving into decision making, I think other members of council obviously can comment.
No, agreed. I mean, that's it.
Okay, was there other members of the water committee have any views? Do you want Martin to prepare something
Or make a proposal?
or make a proposal?
So be it.
Well, I think we need to, as a water committee, whatever you make a proposal on, we're all going to see that, I'm hoping, so that we can discuss it.
Yeah, well, it's also, if we're not a committee, then we don't have to have a meeting. We can do it. And as an advisory panel, just provide the document for council's consideration. So we could work outside of a committee structure. So that's the other decision that has to be made. Jim, you got any views?
No, I would agree with what you're just making a comment on, actually, because I'm prepared to present something to our chairperson.
Yeah, well,
along with Martin.
And there's email that can very quickly disseminate the information and get it over to council. Anyway.
I mean, I think we've learned some of the limitations of our system today, and that may be the deciding point anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. What's your preference, Martin?
No, I can do it one way or another. I mean, that's like we can discuss. I mean, like we can we can prepare a letter to council and make a proposal. It can be discussed at a council meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, okay, like go ahead.
because
Yeah, go.
we've got these other discussion items to do, which may make all of them, there may be part or parcel of whatever is prepared by the, if we're an advisory board. Okay, no?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then, if Martin wants to prepare something, we'll try and get something over to council for their consideration.
And Mayor Ross has his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Oops.
No,
Okay.
no worries. Thanks very much. I mean, I appreciate the conversation that's gone on tonight and what, and Bruce's distinction of this isn't a council meeting, so, you know, any more than two can't be part of even making making recommendations or moving towards those. But I would say this, I believe just generally that council, and I won't take a position of whether you're going to continue or not. You know, I'm very appreciative of your work, but if you decide to continue in the current format, or you decide to do something differently, as I believe Ian and maybe others have put forward, then we would be very supportive. But I think if something came to council, what would be most helpful if it's something that draws on the expertise of all of you, and if you can, get something that talks about moving forward and what are the possibilities and essentially the scope. So that would be my thought. And I don't think it's different from Councillor Drake's, but you know, we're grateful and we'd like to move ahead. We think we've got the next step to be able to make that move, and appreciate the engineers, Nagin and Clive, for being on tonight. Very helpful, and I think you're seeing the quality of our committee. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks,
Ian.
Mayor Ross. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me carry on to item 3 in these discussions, because maybe this will focus the committee's decision on if you want to be a committee or do you want to be an advisory board. So let's.
I just asked if you want to keep the engineers here for this discussion, or are you okay if they?
Well, it's up to them. They may. I'm not sure what way is going to go, but some of these items, this first one in particular, chlorine disinfection, is going to be one of the items that I would suspect that we'll be needing to have them assigned to review or make recommendations on what's available. Whoops, Jamie, sorry.
That's on fire protection.
Mayor Ross has his hand up.
Sorry, and I just know that sometimes with Ian, he doesn't always see the hand, and neither do I when I'm chairing meetings. But I just wanted to get on. I think, and I don't know if we've talked to you, Nagin or Clive, ahead of time, but I look at these from a layperson's perspective, and I think if you're able to stay, I don't want to direct you, but if you're able to stay, I think it would make some sense for you to hear these parts, because the people that are going to be, you know, our members that are going to be discussing them are very well versed and knowledgeable. So I'll stop there. Thank you. So and it's up to both of you. I don't know if you've got time constraints or whatever, or Lorna, if you had arranged something different, but it'd be great if you could stay, and if you can't, we'll connect with you at another time.
Yeah, I'd be happy to stay on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm happy to stay as well, as long as you're happy with us being here and listening in. I understand this is recorded as well, so we can always come back as well, but I'm happy to stay.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry we can't send pizza over to you, but Okay, I'd like to just discuss the recommendation that Fraser Health has made in their letter regarding chlorine disinfection equipment. So that's a pretty broad statement but clearly from what we have run into, every time we try to increase the levels in the Tatlow tank or get more water for firefighting available somehow, you run into the concern by the water operators that they may not have a method of keeping the chlorine levels up except by spilling water. And I think in the fairness to them, they need another tool to control the chlorine levels in the water system. It may not be a continuous type of system. It may be something they need to inject as required. Whatever system is decided and what systems are available. I have to admit, I'm 25 years retired now from fisheries, so I do not know the current status of chlorine systems, but I do know enough that they need the equipment to be able to safely operate whatever system is finally given to them to operate. So I would suspect that inevitably we're going to need to get a chlorine disinfection equipment on the tank, and we'll need to have operators trained so they can operate at that level of water management. And I think the other challenge is going to be a discussion with Belcarra residents on the need or what the chlorine system will do for the safety of our water supply. So,
Sorry, Ian,
Yep.
if I may just interrupt for a minute. At the September 7th council meeting, council passed a motion coming out of a report from Stuart Novak. And I apologize, we're a bit behind on our council follow-up, but the motion was passed by council that council request a staff report from a qualified engineer for a system to incrementally add chlorine at Tatlow. So
okay.
I need you to be aware that council did pass that motion.
Okay, good. So then it would be reasonable for the water committee to endorse that committee or that council motion.
If I could just like comment on something, Ian, like first of all, when we're talking about chlorine, you're really diverging from our objective here, where we're supposed to be focusing on the fire protection. And like 1 point. Second, and correct me if I'm wrong, Clive, but the question if we have an automated system or not, it won't change anything about flowing water at the road ends. The road ends are a constraint, and we need to get some water flows at the road ends. And so opening up those valves at the end of the road ends will always be like required no matter what. So Clive can comment on that. Second, as far as the chlorine is concerned, depending on the alternative that's selected to increase the fire flows, the fire flow capabilities in the system, the question of chlorine will come up. so depending on the alternative, it will be more or less important, and we will we will address it in that context. But I'm not sure as to why you want to really focus on whether we have a subject of chlorine of chlorine, yes or no, in our system at this point. It's kind of like you were starting to diverge on different topics here.
Well, I think we've got a letter from Fraser Health telling us that we have to have chlorine.
Telling the village, yes.
That's right. And we know that we can't get more water. We can't increase the minimum set points.
Yeah.
And that increase is because we want to have more available water for firefighting. So it's interrelated.
Correct.
It's also interrelated to the problem that the chlorine levels at the dead end lines are the ones that are of concern. We have 7 dead end lines in the village water system. And that's where they're sampling for chlorine levels. And a couple of the lines don't have anybody on them, I understand. So there's no flow to support the movement of the water through those dead end lines. So yes, chlorine isn't part of the water committee's terms of reference, but it is interrelated with what's going on as far as available water for firefighting. So that's the difficulty of.
Well, they're correct. But I'm just saying that, for example, one alternative could be adjusting these like water levels, like the set points, which will entail the need for increased chlorination. And so that's one of the definition of one alternative. And then that's where we would want, what is its alternative? So we would have to add this, add that, we would have to modify this. So on.
Well, that's true. The other option would be to loop some of these dead end lines, but that's laying pipe.
No, correct. There's many issues which need to be looked at.
Yeah, but I think the one I'd like, so it sounds like Warren has identified a council motion already to deal with this. And our committee could just simply endorse that that's something that we would be behind council for pursuing. Anybody else have any views?
Yeah, Ian, if I might, just this, that motion to council, if memory serves, was a result of your committee raising that point with us, as well as, of course, pointing out to us that that was a recommendation from the health authority some years ago. So this is circling back to the committee now as a result of its recommendation to us. One. Secondly, and the point you've addressed, the chlorination concern does link directly to one comparatively low cost option for improving our fire flow. And I do apologize to Martin. He's quite right. We're focusing on a very narrow set of options, which we assume are the most cost effective for us to increase fire flow, rather than taking a broader view, which I would expect a full disciplined engineering approach to narrow you down to those options. We're assuming that increasing the minimum level on the tank is a key way to getting us to an acceptably higher fire flow capacity. And as council, as members of the committee are well aware, we're currently doing a very small incremental set of steps, just begun doing small incremental steps on raising that minimum level. And the higher we can bring that up, of course, our worst case scenario is improved, so that we have a longer fire flow at whatever level we specify. irregardless of whether we change the flow from North Vancouver. But it seems to me that if we can push that level up from where it is now, 60%, if we can kick it up to say 75%, and we're quite confident that would require additional chlorine. But if you could combine that with even 30 liters a second from North Vancouver, which is only it was a relatively modest increase, then we would probably have an acceptable fire flow. At least it would certainly be one I'd be prepared to recommend to council. Anyway, I'm just answering Martin's question, why diverge onto chlorine? It's because it would allow us to raise that minimum level without placing at risk the quality of water that we're putting out of that tank at Tatlow.
Yeah.
Okay. So do we include this or just proceed to the next item? Maybe it's under control. The council's already made a motion on it. Jamie?
I was just going to say, as people are trying to piece all the parts together, this one probably comes in a different place because council's moved on it and has acted on it. If the committee feels like where it fits in, and I think Martin makes some good points about where it may fit in. But unless the committee feels that we've been remiss in our action on that, the committee could just simply say or make the comment that they're where we've done it and they're fine. Or conversely, they think we should retrack and do something differently. So really no action is fine, is appropriate now. Does that make sense, Ian?
Well, except the no action is we've got the engineering company online and have they been assigned the task of giving us some options on chlorine systems?
Yeah, I'm just saying the motion's already.
Motion's good, yeah.
Yeah, so if you don't take any action, it's going to move, correct? Lorna, where are you? I'm looking on the screen. Is that correct from our motion that we passed?
Yes, that's correct. We will be moving forward on that. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so does anybody have any other comments or we move on to item B? Okay, item B is the condition of the Tatlow tank. And as Martin said way back when, we need a life expectancy estimate on the Tatlow tank. It's, I don't know how old, 15, maybe 20 years old.
I believe it's from 1999.
22, 23.
Yeah,
Okay.
1999.
God, it's just young. Anyway.
It's the life expectancy of a protective coating on the steel normally, 25 years.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, it's due for a 10-year inspection next February. Can that be part, or should it be part, or will it be part of the overall evaluation?
It should be part of a maintenance program. I mean, we should let the engineering firm speak out on that and not the committee.
I guess maybe Ian, what I can say is working with Lorna and Stuart last little while, we have reached out to the supplier of the tank as well. And I know, I believe Ron's provided some background documents to Lorna and Stuart, and we've gotten some record drawings and are seeking as much information as available, knowing that it was designed in 1998, I believe. So with that, I've also requested the operations and maintenance manual as well, just to supplement the knowledge that this committee and the council already has. So I think with that, and I believe the results of the last inspection as recommended, because if they would have seen the condition inside, then they would have made the recommendation of a reasonable inspection frequency. So that combined with the information that we will get from the manufacturer, I'm hoping in the next week or so, I think can probably help confirm the next steps about the inspection, if that's helpful.
Yeah, because the 2012 report indicated the epoxy coating, the walls, ceiling, and floor are very good condition, virtually no rust forming. So that's good news. And they thought our water quality was excellent. And they were concerned with adding a chlorinated water in there, but the chlorine levels are very low. So anyway, it's still a concern and something we need to know, especially for council to put any this inspection into the operating budget for next year. So
Yeah, I'll reiterate that. Yeah, definitely. If the suggestion is 10 years, I would say definitely it should be on the list. We're working with, say, City of Port Moody, and we help them with their water system as well. We've helped them with reservoir condition assessments. Port Moody's reservoirs are older; they're 40, 50 years old, so they're inspecting their reservoirs on a 3-year cycle. But of course, since your tank is, your first inspection in 2012 was probably when it was 13 years old. 10 years now, the older they get, the more frequent you should inspect them. So 10 years would be good.
okay. All right, and I noticed council's also added the Dutchman's Creek tank into the proposal. So does anybody else have any comments on that one? Sounds like it's in control there. Okay, the next item I had was Village of Belcarra, the water meter installed on a Belcarra side. I believe this is part of the SCADA system. And I understand that our meter on our side doesn't agree with the reading on the District of North Van. So I think it's a good idea that we make sure both meters get calibrated, because, we're paying the bill, but I don't know which one we're using for the reading.
I would let you know also that WSP are working on upgrading our SCADA system, and that work will be done. And I would anticipate that calculation would be part of that upgrade that is required.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Lorna. That's great. Okay. Well, I guess there's nothing further to say on that one. That's great. Village operators now completed all their readings first time around for the water meters in the village, and are in the process of completing the second set of readings. And I guess this is good news, as we should be able to calculate domestic consumptions for the village. Up till now, we only have inflow readings. So with this, we should be able to calculate the domestic consumption, which is only an assumption right now. And we might be surprised. Leakage or difference might be a big surprise to us. Hopefully not, but we would like to make sure that is going to be done. I don't know who's going to do it, but it needs to be done. Anybody have any comments?
What about the increase in consumption, or?
Well, any comment, but no, we've also had this huge increase in consumption over time, but we don't know what the domestic consumption is, right?
So like we've discussed, I believe like Stuart is, if he's still online, is he still online?
No, he's
Yep. Okay, that's more of a staff issue than an engineering as to looking at the data and trying to analyze the data to understand the consumption patterns in the village. There it would be. I've already pointed out a few samples, and I believe there's a lot of information that can be gained on that with the graphs that I showed on the increased consumption in the summer months, and yes, the total consumption is increasing 10% per year and has been for the last 10 years. But you see that the summer months is where there's a huge peak, and the winter months it remains fairly stable and has remained stable in the years that I looked at. So Stuart should have sufficient information in hand to do an analysis on that, and if required, can get support from the engineering. I leave that more for village staff to take care of.
I agree. But as long as it's being done or considered somehow, or built
Correct.
into the workload.
So yeah, if they're working on the SCADA system, I mean, there's a tool there to be able to get much more information than what has been provided. So they can discuss together as to what is the best way to analyze the data.
And that is being discussed, you're right. Yes, thank you. And worked on.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Thanks. Okay, and then the final item for discussion is the draft operating and maintenance manual. And I think my understanding is that I think Chris has submitted something to Stuart, and also I think Ralph has provided his draft material to Lorna and council. So those two items I hope would be put together, and then Stuart has the huge chore of putting together whatever other like records or list material that needs to go into that particular document, so that we can understand and what criteria the water system is being operated under, and who makes decisions and who authorizes decision making. So I'm hoping that that will be together fairly soon and available for. It's a living document, these manuals, so you can always adjust them or maintain them to the current way of doing things, but need to get the involvement of the water operators so they can buy into it as well. So that's going to be a challenge, but I'm sure it will be very useful document for everyone to have available. Bruce, I see your hands up.
Yeah, just that I wanted to say, Ian, I appreciate the support you provided to Ralph on that. That's more or less an unsolicited document, which I think provides a structure that could be very useful for us. I mean, it's ultimately up to council, but I really like the layout of it. I think it provides space for all of the things that we want to see inserted into it, and obviously it is flexible. So I think it gives us the potential for a very useful set of records.
Right. No, I appreciate that, because I know I used to give training courses for industry and other countries on writing HACCP plans, hazard analysis, critical control point. And that's what this document basically is based on. But not, we don't need the detail of a HACCP plan in there. But we certainly need descriptions of what these different valves and pipes and what they do and where they are. And we need a discussion like the problem we had with the minimum setting in the Tatlow tank. How that minimum setting is set, and where is the valve that we're adjusting? So that was sort of a problem that we didn't know when we started 3 years ago. I think we know now, but I haven't seen it in writing.
I would let you know that Stuart is working closely with ISL Engineering, and I've seen 3 or 4 drafts of the operating procedures for the Tatlow Reservoir.
Right, good.
He has received the copies of Ralph's draft document also, and we'll definitely be working on putting those together to form a major document.
Yeah, I think it'll be very useful for everyone concerned, and also for council to sign off, for you to say this is the way it's to be run, and you can have the comfort that that's the rules for running the water system. So I think that'll be the advantage to having this document. Okay, is there any other points?
Ian, excuse me, I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Drake's comments, because I do think it's, and thank you, Lorna, for kind of putting together what's happening right now. But I think it's important for the committee, as they have on other items, to make a comment or whatever, because when Bruce characterizes coming unsolicited to us, it was actually presented, I think, in pretty well I won't call it finished, but quite advanced stage it was in. And so I think it's important, because Bruce and I will, with council, take it and get their thoughts on it. But if the committee has any thoughts, I think that would be useful for us to know when we convey it to council. Okay.
Very good, thanks. Okay, well, that's all the items I had for discussion. I guess since we are a committee, I'd like to entertain a motion of whether we continue to function as a water committee, or whether we recommend to council that perhaps the time is right for us to be moved into an advisory board, which would be less onerous on staff time and probably simpler to operate, rather than function as in the structure form that we have to as a water committee. Anybody want to make a motion? Or would you rather continue on as a water committee?
I'd like to know what council would like us to do, but I guess that's
You're not going to find out.
we won't be able to answer that tonight.
No, they can't.
But yeah, whatever's the most effective, and the you know, it's time consuming for council when we have these committee meetings, and could we be more effective? I don't know. Martin, what do you think?
I'm indifferent, like one way or another. The objective is just to be of assistance to council.
Yeah.
Can I ask through the chair whether Lorna has any comments on the comparative workload for staff?
We've been managing well with the committee meetings, so, you know, I worked with Ian, we put together the agenda. We record the meetings and they're available to committee members. Yes, it's just up to you what you would like to do to move forward, I guess.
I guess my question though, Lorna, is it any less work if the title is that it's an advisory committee? I suppose you don't have to produce minutes. It may just provide us written advice. I'm just curious as to whether it would reduce the administrative burden.
Well, I believe the way Ian described it is that then the committee members could meet without being in a formal meeting setting and have their discussions and perhaps draft a proposal or recommendation to council. Is that the way you view it, Ian?
Yes, I see. We've got the OCP committee coming down the tube for you to have to, that's a huge job. And I see, yeah, we have to, it's very structured if we're calling ourselves a committee, whereas an advisory board can function without minutes and things like that. We can simply provide advice to council as council requests.
Like there's one key point that I'd just like to underline, where I see there's some value is that since our focus is on addressing the, let's say, short fire flow capabilities of a village, we are not acting as an engineering in an engineering role, and so we would like to continue in having exchanges with like WSP with the engineering. So that being said, as an advisory group, how could that function? Because since the engineering, the consultants report to you, Lorna, so how could that be arranged? And who would be required like to be present during these exchanges? Stuart also maybe of for example, in some of our meetings.
Well, then that sounds to me like you would prefer to be a committee, actually. That's fair, that's fine, if that works best.
Can I just get like Ian, like your opinion on that? Because if we're just presented briefs or reports from either staff or the engineering council, it may not be very productive. I believe a dialogue is more intuitive to making progress.
Well, could I suggest things won't change from what it is right now? Because, you know, we weren't involved in the day-to-day working of the village, nor should we be. And so we're not involved in whatever Lorna has set up with WSP to do. So I can't understand that we're only would be involved if council had an issue that they wanted us to provide them some advice on. And I would suggest that would probably start when WSP produces some report or a progress report or something. We're not equipped to do the engineering that they're doing. You are maybe, but not, I'm not. So we're not going to be giving them any advice other than what we've learned over the last 3 years on our water system. And I think they already have a pretty good grasp of what the system does right now.
Yeah, but this my ideas as to alternatives that could be pursued, pursued in order to have a something that we feel can, like we need to have like a low cost and a high cost and a middle ground, as bare minimum. And how you define these alternatives is not something that can be done alone by the council. We need the engineering input there from consultants. So I'd like to hear what WSP I would want them to suggest what are possible alternatives, and then I'd like to have this discussion going. And then also on the presentation, anyways, I'll draft it. Well, it depends on in the proposal that I'll make. I won't get into that level of detail at this time. That will be for a second phase as to which direction we want to go in just having this alternative study done. But then what this study needs to contain, I'd like to give that a framework if possible, if WSP are okay with it and understand the merits of what I will be trying to explain. Once again, I'm used to being an owner's engineer, as I don't make decisions. I just present to an owner all the information so that they can make that decision. It's just a common practice.
Okay, I got two hands up. I will defer to the mayor, Mayor Ross. You're muted right now.
Why don't I let Bruce go first and then I'll come if that's all right, Chair?
Okay,
Just because I believe he had his hand up first and
all right.
then
Okay. Thank you. Just a suggestion, Ian. I mean, I think you've raised something and your members have spoken to it with some additional questions. It might actually be helpful for council to discuss the options, because then it can go into the details that would be its preferences. And there's no reason, of course, the way our councils function, that any of the members that want to join in the next meeting can't weigh in on that. So
Yeah.
you could just leave the question with council as to whether we, in fact, want to propose that you
Yeah.
become an advisory committee as opposed to the structure you're in now. Again, for me, it's really a matter of efficiency. I think you've had huge positive effects upon us thus far. And personally, I don't see the difference. I'm rather with Martin. It doesn't seem like a huge difference to me, but I'd like to explore it in a council meeting so other council members can weigh in and offer opinions and try to sway decisions.
Okay, I'll agree with that. That's good suggestion. And I'll let Jamie, you can have the final 2 minutes.
Okay, well, here's my sense. Martin talked about what he was used to doing as kind of, I think he's described it as an owner's representative. So what I'm used to doing is on difficult issues, in my experience, is to be able to try and listen and work with people that are more knowledgeable than me to try and get to a solution that makes sense. And I have no difficulty on either option that's being suggested. We could do that. But I do know this, on the most difficult issues I ever dealt with, we would start by talking about, here's the issue. It's Wednesday today. We will meet either next Wednesday or we'll meet tomorrow, and we'll meet every day. I think that there is, and this committee has provided, I believe, over time, and it hasn't been an easy file, and I came on partway through, but I think for me, the piece is the engineers that we've brought on today, and this is only my assessment, but they've come on, you know, they've really, I think because of the background with the company, they've got some real familiarity with this. And we've had that I wasn't aware of, but thank you very much, Lorna, for that discussion you had with DNV. I know we were busy today, but that kind of sense of moving it all along. But I think what's also going to move it along is this committee. And this committee, I think, has been a good guide to council that this issue is a pressing one. It's been around too long. So my sense is I don't want to move. I don't want to lose that piece. Like I think that urgency in moving forward, and I'm very, Ian, I want to thank you for your looking ahead about the official community plan and the work on staff. And my sense is this is an incredibly important file. So I'm fine with going forward with council to work on it, but I think there is an urgency. And when you have that for matters and people are moving forward and pressing forward, we're kind of each other's touch base. And so I'd be comfortable if the committee stayed. But again, I've always said I'm one of 5 votes. And if it goes to a different thing, then we'll work with that too. But regardless, thank you for all your work, committee, and thank you for Nagin and Clive for coming on today, and staff, Lorna and Stuart, for your work, and Bruce too. Obviously, it's a long time statesperson for this committee.
Okay, well, thanks for everyone's comments. I think, as Bruce has recommended, I would agree that we were appointed by council, so we should provide council with a time to consider whether they want to continue. Our mandate is up at the end of December, so I think we should wait and get some advice from council as to what they want our committee to provide between now and December and how we move forward. We're all here to serve the community as best we can. We appreciate all of the time and effort that the village of Belcarra has invested in our training on the water system, because we know a lot more now about the system than we did 3 years ago. So that I know the council doesn't want to probably lose that investment, but how best to use it, we'll leave for council to decide. So if that's okay, I guess I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Anybody going to talk to me? Do you want to go home? Maybe
I'll second that.
Thank you. Okay, Jim first. And okay, well, thanks
Look
to
at that.
Najin and to
One
Clive for
last comment.
participating.
Okay.
One
Like,
last comment.
Jim, go ahead.
I'm looking forward to the calculation on the flow of the main line to North Vancouver.
Mhm.
Just out of curiosity, thank you. Earliest you can give it to us.
Be patient, Jim.
Did you want it tonight, Jim?
No, tomorrow noon to be fine.
Okay. Welcome again, Nagin and Clive.
That's a great note to leave on. Thank you all very much.
Okay, well, good night all. Have a good
Thanks,
dinner.
everyone.
Night.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody. Good night. Thank you.
Mhm.